Hey everyone, my name is Mitch Dyer. I am joined during this Far Cry 4 review roundtable by Colin Moriarty.
Beyond.
And Brian Altano.
Rap.
Gentlemen, I reviewed Far Cry 4. I want to talk to you about it, but before we do, let's take a look at the review. Diversity is one of Far Cry 4's strongest assets, and it overwhelms the mostly disappointing story with countless opportunities for freeform adventure and fun. Visual variety, tons of distinct side quests, and a dense world with plenty of options always gave me something I wanted to do, and its satisfying economy had me obsessing over every side quest. It's a little bit safe, almost like Far Cry 3 ideas transplanted onto an amazing new place, but the elements are so empowering that it can be spectacular fun. For more on Far Cry 4, head over to IGN. So I want to jump right in with the big question, kind of loaded, but I want to get your thoughts. Is Far Cry 4 better than Far Cry 3, and is it the best Far Cry game ever made?
Yikes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's, having played for 10, 11, 12 hours at this point, it is the same as Far Cry 3. It's just a different place with arguably much more to do.
Now, do you mean this in a good way? It's the same as Far Cry 3?
I do mean in a great way.
Okay.
I mean, it's a formula, this open world shooter formula that's really special. We talk a lot about annualizing Metroidvania games or annualizing Mega Man or things that like just really strike a great balance and a great gameplay formula. And this is another example of just another map and another story and more things to find. So I think it's kind of the same so far.
Brian Altano.
I think there's enough in it that feels new, and I think that's mostly because of the setting. I think that the setting, it is more the same, that's right, but I do feel that the setting this time around is more memorable to me, and I think that putting it in the Himalayas gave it a better variety in terms of you do have some sort of what feels like jungle stuff, and then you do have these snow-capped ruins here and there. So I would say that it's probably my favorite Far Cry game so far.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Now, I haven't played nearly as much of the last few, but this one has, for all better purposes, grabbed me
Sure.
a lot better than the last few have.
Yeah, and I agree because the systems, right? You have these volatile systems that have improved on Far Cry 3. You have the ability to throw bait and summon a monster out of nowhere. Not monster, but like a tiger monster. You can summon a tiger, right? But maybe there's a hunter in the camp and it takes control of the tiger, and now they're using it against you.
Yeah.
You have new means of getting around by grappling up a mountain. And I love that stuff. I loved climbing up cliffs and swinging over ledges and stuff like that. It felt like an adventure. It felt almost like an Indiana Jones thing where I'm exploring and discovering this cool place.
And I think that this sort of, the way all of those systems combine, on the fly, sometimes without your say.
Yeah.
Is what really creates some of my favorite moments in the franchise. That you can run up to an outpost and in the middle of a fight, a tiger shows up and you throw some bait down and 3 wolves show up. And then you walk away and the tiger and the wolves start fighting a bunch of people and there's 2 guys left and you can go up and stealth kill him. And that's sort of a situation that can feel a little different every single time, depending on what nature decides to throw at you. Or you're just in a race and there's a rhino and he flips your car over. And he wasn't there the time before.
100% happened to me.
Stuff like that is really interesting to me, and I like the insane randomness of all that, and how there are ways to make it a little more calculated and control it a little bit better. But there's always still that chance that in the middle of doing something important, a hawk might fly out of the sky and attack you.
Yeah, and it's those moments, right? The things that define Far Cry for me are those moments of almost inconvenience where you're it's so irritating that a rhino came out of nowhere and killed me, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
And having a hawk come down and attack you in the middle of a firefight reminded me of Far Cry 2, right? Where you'd be in the middle of a firefight and you'd be stricken with malaria. And you'd fall to the ground and open your pills and you'd pop one. Meanwhile, dude just shooting at you.
Yep.
And you'd fire back at them and your shotgun shell would get jammed in the chamber and suddenly you have to mash the reload button to fix it. And I love those elements. And I'm still sad that those are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, the game seems a little less hardcore.
Yeah. And I actually, one of the major things for me, Far Cry 2 will forever be my favorite Far Cry game. I admit that Far Cry 4 has better systems, it looks better, the world is better realized, and its storytelling is more mature and stronger, but the element of Far Cry 2 that always stands out to me is the buddy system, which this kind of tries to meet halfway with the Guns for Hire.
Yeah.
You can call in help and that person will show up and they'll help you fight, but you don't know their name, you don't know anything about them, they're kind of expendable. I would use them to detonate landmines. I'd be I know there are landmines here in the way. Guns for Hire, drive up there and boom, take it out. So they were expendable. But with the buddy system, I would have somebody that I cared about come in and help me and rescue me and bring me back to life and potentially die. And when they died, that became part of my story. That was the emergent stuff, more so than oh no, flaming tiger attacked a guy.
Yeah.
Which is great, but it's not I don't know, I miss that Far Cry 2 human element.
Sure.
So Far Cry 2 is still my favorite Far Cry. But you guys say Far Cry 4 is the best Far Cry for you?
I don't know. I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what Brian's saying in terms of like the verticality of the map's really different. Like the tropical island kind of Far Cry 3 is very reminiscent in a way of Crysis.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a different thing. There's a lot of geodiversity and a variety of flora and like snow-capped mountains and rivers and so it's cool. I think that like a lot of the rock climbing stuff is actually a gameplay, a game design decision to make you not throw your controller through the window trying to find ways up.
Yeah.
Because the topography changes so much. But yeah, I think they're pretty much the same for me. I love Far Cry 3. I mean, I platinumed that game. I played that game obsessively when it came out and really enjoyed it. So I think this one's on par with it right now. I don't know. I'm not far enough into the story yet to know how I feel about it because I actually like kind of enjoyed Far Cry 3's story because it was more of just like a silly action movie that just took 30 hours.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the same with this one so far. So it's I have to see more, but I think I love it right
Awesome.
now. Yeah.
Gentlemen, right now I would like to talk to you about Far Cry 4's story.
Sure.
Because I have significant issues with it.
Okay.
I know that you're both not terribly far, but I want to get your impressions based on where you're at right now. Like, what do you make of Ajay Ghale, the character, his place in the world, his family's history, Pagan Min, all of this stuff? Like, where do you stand with all of this?
I generally have a very hard time associating or even feeling compassion for any character that I play as in a first-person shooter. It is very rare that there's something about removing my sort of visual perception of seeing that character on screen and making it so it's just arms and hands and a bow that makes me completely detached from a character like that. So I think he's serviceable. I think his voice acting is great. I think that as somebody experiencing the perils of this world, it's very fascinating to go through. In terms of his story and his backstory and his future story, I don't really care. And there's a lot of really important and interesting story elements happening in Far Cry 4. And I honestly see them as sort of a distraction from the fact that I just want to explore the world. Like when I reached the first point in the game where they said you can't go into the Northern Hemisphere yet until you complete these story missions, I was almost like, well, that's bull, because I've been playing and exploring everywhere without anyone telling me what to do or where to go and when. And now all of a sudden I'm basically just using cutscenes to further my ability to explore the world more. Like they are a hindrance that I go and do and get over with that lead me to some cool levels, like taking over an outpost or a big temple or something like that. But I really just want to get back to me out in the wild with a bow and arrow, hunting and climbing and shooting and fishing and catching.
That's really funny because in most games, right, you have the main story and then all the stuff you can do on the side quests, like those are the distractions there if you want them. But in Far Cry 4, those missions are kind of where it's at, especially in terms of like fun side stories. There's a lot more depth to exploring those distractions than I think the main story offers, right? Like finding your father's journals around the world and finding the Yalung masks.
Yeah.
Finding like hot on the trail, this serial killer. That stuff is awesome. I love that. But the thing with AJ is that he's just so lifeless and ambivalent about everything he's doing. He doesn't care about the Golden Path rebellion. Even though I think their goals are really interesting. I think where Amita and Sabal want to take it is really cool, but AJ doesn't care, so why should I?
Yeah.
He shows a little bit of life in the beginning with one of the scenes. It's just like a little thing, but one of the things I was like, well, maybe there's a little bit more to this protagonist than I thought was. They're at the table with Pagan Min in the beginning after the scene that we saw at E3 and stuff like that. And Pagan Min is tasting the ashes in the urn or whatever, and then he walks away from the table and he grabs the urn and puts the top back on. And I was like, that's an interesting like little thing where I'm like, okay, so maybe they're like gonna make him a little more emotional or a little more, I don't know, just driven by like what he's there to do as opposed to exploring this island. But it ends up, as Brian said, like it ends up you just kind of end up on this in this landlocked country, in this mountainous country.
He brings that up too. He at one point says, I'm only here to scatter my mother's ashes. No, you're not.
No, you're here to.
There's so much more to do, and it's so clear that you don't. Like that's not really why you're here. Like you're here to be caught up in this rebellion.
But the one shame about and I don't want to judge the plot because I haven't gotten far enough in it. But the one thing that Far Cry does really well, and I think I only realized it when I started playing this, even though the last one did the same thing, was the way that NPCs deal with you is very lifelike. And it's a shame that they don't have a better story if you're saying the story's bad or whatever, and the same with Far Cry 3. Like, if you think about Fallout 3 or like Skyrim, like you meet a character and it's just like, The person's like
It's
standing
just
there
a
and
static talking head.
But like they'll like touch you and work like you're there. Like they'll put their arm around you and like walk around. You turn and like they grab your arm and you see your arm for a minute and then they put like it's like really. A lot of games, actually most games, don't do anything like that. So it's a real shame that it's very tactile in that way. Like you feel.
It's physical.
Like you feel like you're there almost in a sense. It's funny because you're saying the first person perspective removes you, and I agree. But like it's so funny that perspective was designed to immerse you.
Yeah.
And like and it doesn't do it well most of the time, but like they're trying, I think, in this, which is kind of cool.
And I think
really
that's actually like I don't want to say the story in Far Cry is bad because it's not. It's fine. It's serviceable if anything. But to me, the story in the game is stuff like that. It is the Himalayas. It is the people there. It is the character interactions. It is that everything in the game feels tangible. That feels janky. You get in a helicopter. There's duct tape on it. Like there's something. There's a story to all of that. There's a personality to all that, and it's in the environment. It's in the world. It's not so much in the cutscenes. It's not so much in the script. It's not so much in like the excellent voice acting for Pagan Min, who I think is a great character that isn't really used as much as you'd want him to be. So to me, the story is about surviving and being in this huge area with these locals that you're trying to help. And if I just look at the game like that, then it's one of my favorite games of the year.
Sure.
If I look at it for other reasons, then it sort of feels like when you hear the narrator telling you the story when you're about to get on a Disney ride. You're like, it's secondary, it's interesting.
Yeah.
There's somebody
That's not really why
babbling
I'm
about.
here, but it's nice that.
Yeah,
you're there
it's not really why I'm here,
guess.
but once the ride gets going, you're like, this is the story. You know, whatever the guy was saying before this all happened, it's fine, but it's just window dressing.
And I think long-term, Far Cry 4's story does pay off. Like the history with AJ's family and their connection to Pagan Min and the truth about like Lakshmana and all these different things that I won't spoil for you guys are really great. There are some really incredible, powerful moments, especially with Amita and Sabal along the way. But I think, to your point, like there are these interactions with these characters, I think that's the detriment to Far Cry 4's story. There are some truly awful characters in this game. Have you guys met Reggie and Yogi?
The stoners.
Yeah, I did.
They are so extremely out of place and just unbearable. They don't. I mean, Far Cry 3 had a lot of like cool drug trip stuff, and Far Cry 4 falls back on that in a way that I think is lazy. And those guys are responsible for that, and I'm already kind of bitter toward them for that. But then they're also just. I find them like kind of funny and charming in the way that they have like a rapport, and their rapport is really good, but their dialogue is just awful, and the jokes they're making are tonally out of place. Like it just doesn't make sense to have.
Well,
those
I feel like they're gatekeepers for some pretty cool missions, though. So it's just getting past like when the first time you talk to them, you end up in those like in that big sort of arena, and you're fighting a bunch of enemies like wave after wave, and there's crowds cheering for you, and like that's a really cool, powerful scene that again feels very Indiana Jones, right?
Sure.
And they use them as the sort of the people that open the doors for that to happen. And that really could have happened any other way, but
Yeah, and I mean, when you get to the Shanath Arena, you meet Nor, who's you know, she's like one of Pagan's lieutenants, and you know her to be this like really incredibly disgusting warlord who has control over the territory, and she has this barbaric arena, but she's also doing it for a personal cause. It's like, Pagan Min has my family, Paul DePleur has my family, please help me. And that's, again, it falls back on the very human premise of fighting for your family like AJ is. But it just doesn't pay off, and Nor's story is never fleshed out. She never has time to become interesting before she leaves the story forever. Same thing with Paul DePleur. He's a charismatic guy like Pagan Min who never gets enough time for me to really care that he's there, and then he's gone. So most of these characters seem kind of throwaway at best and unbearable at worst.
Yep.
I would like to talk to you guys about Far Cry 4 as a next generation experience. This is the first Far Cry game we've seen on new gen consoles, PS4, Xbox One. It also came out for Xbox 360 and PS3. It works, it's fine. You know, the game is there. It doesn't look quite as good, but do you feel like playing this on PS4 and Xbox One that this is a true new next gen experience?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't even really know what that means either. Like when people talk about that, like I don't know exactly like what we're looking for.
Fair enough.
With these new generation consoles. But as long as they're straddling the line and releasing pretty much an identical game on both, we're not going to see something that's truly taking advantage of the power of the new consoles. But it's, you know, it's like I said, it would be weird for me to say otherwise because it is identical in most respects to a PS3 game. So, you know, Far Cry 3 or an Xbox 360 game. So, no, I don't think so. But I don't think there's any fault with that. I haven't seen anything this generation that is new gen or next gen at all because I think it's more about the services and more about the way the consoles connect to the internet and the array of games that you have as opposed to single games and how they might play differently. And people want shooters, and they want RPGs and they want action games, and they're going to continue to get those. I don't see that changing.
And I think that the next gen effect, right? The things we're looking for are very small things. Like if you look at Assassin's Creed Unity, it's new gen only, and the details it has are like, wow, like it's just it is that graphical thing, but it's also just the density of the world. Like it feels alive because there are people in the streets, like enormous amounts of people.
Yeah.
And I think in Far Cry 4, the difference is like in the physics and the visual effects, right? Like the peace banners blowing in the wind and the snow drifting off the mountains and the fog coming over the hills. That stuff isn't really there on PS3 and Xbox 360. And for me, like that is what makes it. That just helps seal the deal with the world, with Kyrat being a truly like lived in place, somewhere that feels, real as it can get in a game.
Yeah. I think that we've moved the goalposts a little bit about what we thought this generation would be. I think we all thought it would be another leap like the Super Nintendo was to the N64 or the PS1 to the PS2 or the PS2 to the PS3, which was a huge leap. And I don't think it's been that case. I agree with Colin to the extent that this generation's been more about like the subtleties and the details and online service and stuff like that. But I do think that this game feels very next gen to me, and that's because once I've sort of come to grips with the fact that this is not going to be something that's completely photorealistic top to bottom, I'm okay with that, and I'm now happier to celebrate the fact that this game is like fluid, extremely fluid. It's smooth, and getting into a vehicle and driving across the entire world, crashing it, getting out, getting in a gyrocopter and flying up in the air, stuff like that to me is what makes this feel like it's a next-gen game, because it feels like I feel like this is one of the most fully realized, beautiful open world games we've seen in the new console generation. Whereas I feel like some of the other games are some of the other first-person shooters, like you look at Advanced Warfare, it's got a lot of good ideas, but it's still the single-player campaign is very, point A to point B focused.
Yeah.
Whereas I could walk from end to end of this earth in Fallout and see new things constantly. Like I could take, like you were talking about, taking off like a lot of the HUD elements and just walking around and exploring. I think like seeing the blades of grass, like seeing your helicopter get stuck on a part of a tree, like watching 3 elephants run in and flip a car over. The explosions look incredible. The little things like the flags, like just sort of like pieces of paper flickering in the wind, tearing off a poster from a wall, like little details. There aren't, they're not photorealistic, but there are so many of them that they really add up to a beautiful experience. And I think that this game, it's actually leans towards its own sort of art style. Like it's somewhere in between. It's kind of cartoony, which I kind of love.
Yeah, it's stylized in an interesting
It is stylized.
way.
It's not just photorealistic, which I think once you drop that pretense a little bit, you realize that, in the style they're working with, in the world that they're building here, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and it's a feat that they were able to put so much and such an amazing realized world into one place.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that it is on 360 and Xbox One and PS3 and PS4 is indicative, like, okay, they were constrained by the previous generation hardware, so they could only do so much with the new gen consoles, but it doesn't ever feel like it's anchored in any way. It never felt like Far Cry 4 was like, it's almost there, and they just couldn't quite do it because of the last gen consoles. Mm-hmm. There's so much to this world. The space is enormous. The amount of things you can do is ridiculous. And then there's all sorts of crazy side quests, like you can go up into the Himalayas, and that's a totally new setting. It looks totally different. It's visually different. It operates differently. There are new mechanics in that you can shoot snow and it'll come down and crash down on enemies. You can go to, like you guys haven't done much of the side quest stuff or the story stuff, but when you go to Shangri-La, it is this incredible place, gold skies, red foliage, and it operates very differently, again, in terms of like how it looks and what you do, because you control a tiger and you're fighting enemies in new ways, and you have this spread shot bow and arrow that kind of slows time, and it's just, there's so much variety to what you're doing that it feels like such an enormous game that I forget that, it makes me forget like, well, what is the next gen, is the new, like it doesn't matter, it's just there, it's here, and it's big, and it's awesome.
Well, the power of the new consoles is we used to talk about how you have to make concessions on the old hardware to achieve what you were looking for, at least graphically or in your world. You have a game like Fallout 3 that's frankly not very pretty, even for its time, and that was because they had to use PS3's 256 megabytes of RAM to run the game to render the world, and then the other 256 megabytes for graphics. So with no constraints like that anymore, now you can have a big open world that looks like Uncharted, and it's a big open world like Fallout, and it's in the same package. And I think that's like what we're seeing with games like this now, is that the arc, like the line on the graph between like graphical jumps from platform to platform are actually lower now, I think, than they ever been. Like, I don't think this game is that much prettier than what you can do on PS3. If you look at a game like Uncharted 3 versus this, Uncharted 3 or Last of Us might arguably be prettier than this game. But now you can have a big open world that looks like that. And so it's about, having the RAM to run all of this stuff at once. And I think that's really cool. The draw distances are amazing. The game doesn't hiccup. It runs smoothly. There's a lot going on at one time. Animals are running in and explosions, and there's 7 guys shooting at you, and your friends are there, and everything just is perfect. Like a PS3 obviously couldn't do that as easily. So I think that is the new gen difference, is that you can have the best of both worlds now. You don't have to make these concessions. Well, we can only have The Last of Us if we have a linear game. Or you can only have Fallout 3, but it's got to look like this.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
That's us. Let us know what you think. You know the drill. Comments below. Tweet at us. Brian is at Agent Bizzle. Colin is at No Taxation. I am at Mitchie D. That's our review roundtable discussion for Far Cry 4. Be sure to check out the full conversation on IGN.